I need a one dance in opening opportunity. We have Gluteus MARAximus. In closing government, we have IIUM. In closing opportunity, we have Deepavali Valthukkal. Reminder for the audience: silent your phone. If you need to get out of the room, make sure it's in between speeches or don't go at all. Keep discussion to the minimum. On the motion that stands on his name, I call this House to order and invite Prime Minister. Here.
In the theatres of war, we recognize that the soldiers' life are mere means to achieve the ends of national security and protection of civilians. It is sad, and we recognize that when soldiers go out to war, they expect to die, they expect to never return home. And we think it is sad, but there's no better alternative for us to protect the better good of protecting our country. I'll talk to you about a few things in opening government. Number one, I'll tell you why we need to kill our kidnapped soldiers in order to protect very sensitive information that could fall into the hands of terrorists. Number two, I'll also maybe tell you why it's actually more humane to kill these soldiers. Number three, I'll tell you the difficulties or what could happen when our soldiers were taken as hostage. But number one, let's talk about war and the information that could fall into the hands of terrorists. Number one, we think first and foremost, these terrorists recognize the characterization that they would have no qualms using the exact same tactics that the CIA used on their people onto our soldiers as well. Perhaps even worse measures to torture our soldiers, to torture them, and to extract important military secrets, such as convoy routes, such as the supply lines of where we get our armor and where we get our food and food ration, our munition depots, attack plans, and get access to our stockpile of weapons. Sure.
Yeah. Would you instruct soldiers that are captured to kill themselves?
Yeah, but there's no guarantee. I want them to die. So if that's not clear enough for you, but let's go on to why that is so important. So the information that could fall into the hands of these terrorists are what I told you just now. And why is it catastrophic for these terrorists to have their hands onto this information? Number one, we'll tell you that so far, the only reason why the West still has some kind of leverage over terrorist groups in the Middle East are because we're able to constantly resupply our soldiers with food ration, with the military weapon, with the ammunition that they need at a rate that surpasses those terrorists at a rate that they can never achieve because their supply of weapons and ammunition are limited to either the black market or plundering local counties and local countries. When we lose those ability, when we lose this information of our supply route, of where we keep our ammunition, of where we transport these things to our soldiers, we think it's extremely easy for terrorist groups to plant IEDs to one, destruct our supply, and two, to plunder our first-grade weapons that the US have and use those greatest and most advanced weapons against us. We think that is extremely horrible when you consider the cost. We're killing one person, sure, but it comes at the benefit of limiting and preventing a terrorist group that has no qualms of killing hundreds of thousands of people from getting their hands onto these weapons that can kill entire cities, entire towns, and pose a significant threat to our home nation. No, thank you. Especially when you consider how ISIS has been attaining all the supplies that they need, because they can only depend on the black market, but more importantly, they depend on plundering local countries and from taking away food, ration or whatever that they need from the local citizens. When they get their hands onto our supplies and what we have, we think it gives them an upper hand above ourselves. It will be much more difficult for us to counter their threat in future. But number two, it's not just military secrets. It's also about the search and rescue missions that the West constantly does. It's about rescuing civilians. So what we currently do is that we allow collaboration with with the military and the NGOs. So NGOs and humanitarian groups can attach themselves to military convoys so that they can go around in search and rescue missions of helping or finding these civilians and transporting or relocating them to safe zones. And these are information that can never fall into the hands of terrorists, because should they know where we are keeping and where we're protecting the civilians, it will be a target for them. We think that's extremely dangerous. Why we think this trade-off is not only important, one, in terms of the new number of lives that we are able to protect and safe. But number two, we think soldiers already consent to the risk in war, but the civilians never had the chance. So we have to prioritize those kinds of situations. In a split-second decision, when you see your teammate or your comrade being taken away, we don't have much time to have this in-depth analysis of what are the chances of him or what are the chances of us going and escaping him. We think the most important decision is for us to kill and to safeguard the information. Okay.
Surely they may expect that, but they must also expect that the state and the army would do something for them in a scenario where they get captured and not just get left behind.
I think the principle has to be very, very clear to all soldiers that when you go into the army, you expect to serve and to put all others above yourself. So if you have to die, if it means sacrificing you, if it means your soldiers and your comrades are going to abandon you, I'm sorry, but that is the cost of protecting your nation. I think our soldiers are noble enough to uphold that principle. But number two, we also think it's much more humane if we're talking about protecting these soldiers who are captured. I mean, we all know that a lot of these terrorist groups are born, in fact, fueled by the resentment what the West have imposed onto them. Your CIA torturing tactics have become public and everyone knows how they have been torturing people, innocent people, in fact, from people from Middle East and because of racial profiling. We think because they would have no qualms, no scrutiny, and no accountability in what they do to our soldiers, it will be much worse. They would be keeping them alive, they'll be torturing them, even if they don't get information. We think the sheer fact that they hold our soldier as hostage and hold our soldiers in their captivity gives them the ability to boast about their powers and to show that they have an upper hand above the Western world. We think not only is inhumane to allow our soldiers to suffer in that situation, it's also inhumane to allow our citizens to fear that these things can happen to them. And those things are highly, highly dangerous. Lastly, I also want to happens when a soldier is kidnapped and we just kill him, he becomes a casualty. On the converse, if we allow this person to be held as hostage, we see ISIS do those videos and put it out to the public to allow the public to pressure the governments into situations or decisions that may not be the most strategic possible. And those are the things that you allow leverage and you hand over to terrorists when you allow them to take your soldiers. Never stand for that. Propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I invite Leader of Opposition for the activities for set.
Speaker, it is disgusting that the life of a child playing by the park has to be killed for the end that serves very little purpose. It is disgusting from that side of the house that a soldier along with that child will also have to die knowing that the state may be the one who caused that person's death, knowing that that information that he may have may very well not be that compromising to the state, especially considering the rank of his rank, as well as the amount of information he actually does have in this regard. We have to analyze two important contexts in this debate before I engage with the opening government. First context is when Israel actually allowed and initiated the Hannibal Directive. It was for information, but in the end it was removed because they deemed it illegitimate because the soldiers had to be sacrificed and a lot of people had to be sacrificed, and a lot of support to any initiations against terrorist activities will also lose the support as well, and that makes it harder for them to maneuver around the support by the legislation. Also, ladies and gentlemen, it operates around the context where terrorists as they stand right now also have a powerful siege mentality to themselves. They feel secluded, not heard, and immediately antagonized. When you do this, it makes it highly unlikely when states have to rely on purely just getting these guys from for the sake of information, but not necessarily have any opportunity or any initiative to actually negotiate with terrorists to get back these soldiers, which makes it unlikely for us to ever reach a middle ground with them. Not ideologically, but at the very least, we can reach some sort of compromise when it comes to tangible things that we may have from them, for example, and initiate some sort of negotiation as well. You just make them far more extreme in the end anyway. What do we support from this side of the house? We support, firstly, ladies and gentlemen, very easily, that if there is a soldier that will be captured, we will do whatever it takes to negotiate for the safe return of these very soldiers. This means that making sure that we would have a tangible exchange between these terrorists, like, for example, prisoners of war and so on, but not necessarily compromising on ideologies. We'll also be happy with, upon realization of the capture of these soldiers, for us to just simply mitigate any potential harm that will come from it. Like, for example, stationing men at the areas where the terrorists may have the information of, and stationing men to make sure that, these areas that we're trying to protect is not immediately that compromised. But more importantly, what we also support is the effort to maintain the public goodwill in the state, meaning not letting the state know that we're killing their own people in the process of trying to kill this soldier as well. No, thank you. We're okay with the transparency of terrorist efforts that currently exist. We're okay with making sure that there's an emotional assurance that lives that they're trying to protect are indeed protect, as opposed to having them compromised just because we want to make sure these soldiers would die and not have information fall in the hands of the terrorists as well. What we support from this side of the house, and what the stance from this side of the house, is that it is simply ineffective in dealing with terrorists, but also it's extremely important to not waste the lives of so many innocent individuals in this effort as well. They have to prove to us whether the amount of benefit that they would actually get from making sure this information doesn't reach the terrorists would actually be able to outweigh the value, firstly, of the lives being lost, but also the value of the amount of support, as well as a lot of other important considerations that would come from having the support of the people lost as well as the support of the international community as well. Yes, madam.
Do you think the public care more about losing a few soldiers or care more about securing their own national interests and preventing another 9/11?
Firstly, they also care about the other aspect of the Hannibal Directive, which is being okay with compromising the lives of others in the vicinity to protect the soldiers. But the second thing that they would be extremely careful of is knowing whether the state really cares about the people as a collective, meaning the soldier as well. If that is how little the state actually cares about the soldier, that is how little the state cares about citizens in general. And that is a sentiment that you're also painting by the state towards the people themselves. That's an important consideration that citizens actually make. Two arguments. Why is it principally unjustified? And second of all, why it makes it unlikely for us to sustain any efforts of terrorist activity, of mitigating terrorism as they exist right now. Firstly, let's look at why is it principally illegitimate. Let's first of all take into consideration that you're sacrificing a lot of lives who, firstly, if we're talking about civilians, never consented to the capture of these soldiers and have an expectation by the state to protect them as well. We believe that the value of these individuals as a citizen is extremely unjustified for you to lose because of, firstly, information that these soldiers actually have. More often than not, the information that's held by a footman soldier comes in brackets and also categories, meaning that it all comes from different source of information or different part of information that you may have as a soldier. This means that the threat that you are trying to save yourself from as a result of losing this information is not that conclusive anyway. A soldier may know that the route of transportation would be as such, but a soldier may not necessarily also know the kind of plans or the kind of protocols that we have in deploying soldiers to protect the area now that the terrorists will also know that these areas exist as well. This means that the value of information that you are trying to conserve is not necessarily definitively causing threat to the operations that you do have also that you also have as well. So what this ultimately means, ladies and gentlemen, considering that the value of information that you're getting is not that conclusive anyway, we don't necessarily see how it justifies, firstly, taking away the lives of these soldiers, especially when there is a probability of you saving them or negotiating for them, but second of all, sacrificing the lives of many people who will be in that area as well. The second reason why is it principally unjustified for you to do this is because maintaining public support and letting them know that you're not killing your own people is extremely important. Firstly, it could be based on a very aesthetic reason. Maintaining the peace of your area, especially in a war-torn in a wartime, ladies and gentlemen, considering that people don't live in panic, knowing that their own people will be killed as well by the state, knowing that they have somewhere to go to, and that they also have known, morally speaking, ladies and gentlemen, that the state is also protecting them as well. And a minor response that I have to that side in regards to hostages and why it's bad for us to have a hostage situation is that firstly, that would have existed anyway. More often than not, ladies and gentlemen, the hostage situation will be far worse under your side of the house because it's not execution by the enemy, it's also execution by the state. And we think there is a key comparative that needs to be made by the execution of the state, but also the execution of the enemy. People can accept the fact that the enemy is evil and we lost our lives to people who are evil, but not necessarily being executed by the state themselves and knowing that they have no sense of security whatsoever because their own states are killing them as well. Let's also look at the sustainability of these efforts as well. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, our own people provide funding for legislation, and we think that's extremely important for any wartime efforts. If the state is being seen as killing off their own people, it's highly unlikely for you to get that support. More explanation later. But second of all, ladies and gentlemen, we also need to get the support of countries surrounding us for war efforts, resources, and etc., especially when it's geographical in nature. Knowing that their own human lives could be lost as well is a consideration that these countries would have when it comes to collaborating with us or not. Ladies and gentlemen, we urge you to be strategic and not fetishize one soldier to compromise the security of the country in such an extreme lens.
Thank you, Minister of Opposition. In the case for open government, I invite Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, three main arguments in today's debate. Firstly, what are our principles when negotiating with terrorists? Secondly, on how terrorists function and spread their ideologies, i.e. through fear mostly. Thirdly, on international support and how their side uses it. But before I go into that, a few rebuttals. Now, one of the first things that they came up and they told us was this whole idea of we need to be able to negotiate with terrorists. If we shoot our own soldiers while they are trying to escape with them or taking them hostage, the terrorists are going to get really angry with us. It's going to antagonize them and make them even more aggressive and along those lines. The question here is this: if that's the case, if all you want is that negotiation, if all you want is to not antagonize them, then by logic you should have to stop shooting at them as well. You'd have to allow them to get away. You'd have to cease all forms of offensive action. Status quo is not what that is, because right now we are embroiled in a war on terrorism in Syria, in Iraq. We have it's a war zone where numerous lives are at risk, where we cannot afford to allow them that luxury of being able to negotiate or being able to hold our soldiers hostage. I'll talk more about this later on. Secondly, right, they came and they told us that when we allow our soldiers to die, when we sacrifice their lives, the public is going to feel that we don't value the lives of the soldiers. Contrary to that, when soldiers laid down their lives at Iwo Jima, when they sacrificed their lives storming the beaches of Normandy, the public did not say that these soldiers, oh no, we let them die, we sacrificed them. The public hailed them as heroes because the public recognizes that these soldiers are dying for a cause. They are dying in order to protect their lives. The public can appreciate that sacrifice and can appreciate the severity of the situation that soldiers have to be sacrificed to protect them. If you don't do it, it's when you don't allow these form of actions, when you trivialize it, allow for hostages, that's when you show that you're not putting national security first, you're not looking at the long-term goal, and that's when the public raises questions based on your consent, based on your decisions, and how serious you are in tackling the issue and getting rid of the terrorism at its root cause. Thirdly, they came and they challenged us and they said that, look, the information is not important because it comes in brackets, it's all separated. A few soldiers know this, a few soldiers know that. The problem here is this: it's not as if ISIS is going to kidnap one soldier and stop there. In more likelihood, they are going to kidnap and they're going to get as many people as possible, extract whatever information that they can get, and use that to piece together the jigsaw puzzle. That's a risk we cannot take. Because if they find one soldier with a key piece, or even soldiers with lots of munitions, gives them the information they need. Even, let's take them at their very best case, these soldiers know absolutely nothing. They don't have any idea about classified information. Fine. One thing the soldier will know is where the hell they came from. They are going to know where they were going, where they came from. You can't Things like that don't erase from your memory automatically. And that's all ISIS needs to know. If they know which area that soldier came from, if they can get that one piece of information, they know exactly where to attack. They know where those soldiers are situated. An area gives them the ability to scan, to scout the place, find out an exact location and launch an attack. Their idea of when the soldiers are compromised, put more men in place to defend the place, to defend it. But you are risking even more lives on your side, right? Because if you're going to put more men there, if you're going to try and defend the place from ISIS, you're basically saying, come attack us, bro. We'll sacrifice even more soldiers. They tell us that soldiers' lives are important, but on their side of the house, they put even more soldiers' lives at risk. At the end of the day, this debate is about the trade-off. It's about whose lives, how many lives are sacrificed, and who saves more lives. I'll show you more about why we save more lives. Now, before I move on, anyone? Okay, good. Okay, let's look at the principles of terrorism, because this is something very important. So according to side government, they said we are going to negotiate, we are going to have handovers, things like that. But that's not how governments function. The US government has a very clear directive of not negotiating with terrorists, not allowing them to arm themselves, not giving them weapons in exchange for soldiers, other prisoners in exchange for soldiers, money, whatever it is. Because this is a situation where it's a war zone. You're fighting a war. The minute you give in to your opponents, the minute you give them any form of access or resources, whether it's weapons, individuals, or money, that's what they're going to use to empower their soldiers and come back and attack you. This is not a situation of the United States being happily sitting at home, not having to worry about any attacks, and some random group kidnapping some random soldier in some godforsaken place where there is no active war zone, where we can safely hand over a soldier and get the soldier back. This is a situation where they are embroiled in war, where their soldiers are on the front lines, are attacking Mosul as we speak to try and reclaim that city. These are lives. These are soldiers' lives that are at risk. And any amount of handover or whatever form of negotiation you want to give in to their demands or to bring them to the table will empower the terrorists, which will put more lives at jeopardy. Secondly, how do terrorists function? How has ISIS grown? One of the main things that ISIS has used is fear-mongering. They have created this aura of invincibility, of showing that they have the power of bringing the bigger countries to their knees, making them try and taking their soldiers out and things like that. Sit down. When you allow your soldiers to be captured, that's exactly how you play into that, because you show you are vulnerable. You show that your soldiers can be taken, and when you're forced to, and when that image goes out, that's what emphasizes the invincible that ISIS has, and they're capable of taking on the United States and beating them. We've got their soldiers. We are beheading their soldiers right now. That's how you show that ISIS is a force to be reckoned with. You empower that rhetoric, you give them more clout. Lastly, right, on this whole idea of international support, because we heard from their side that people are going to lose support, public legislation and all of that. But we need to be very logical here. The war is being fought in Syria, in Iraq. Now, if you have a handover, if you want to negotiate with terrorists and you give them, say, you return my one US soldier, I'll give you 100 million. I'll give you a weapon, I'll give you one soldier. What that is, that message that essentially sends is that you're more concerned about your one soldier than about what those weapons, those resources you give to ISIS will do to the Iraqis and the Syrians there. You're more concerned about saving the lives of your one American soldier than engaging in a way to quell the war, to stop the terrorism once and for all. That's how you lose international support, because you show that you are not serious about dealing with the issue if it's going to cost you a soldier. That's when the Iraqis and the Syrians withdraw their support for your armies. That's when they say, screw you, you don't have our interests at heart. For that, we are very proud to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. During the case of opposition, I invite Deputy to come here.
position of opening government, of reducing the lives of our military and civilians in the vicinity as mere tools to reach an end is insufficient and disgusting. Because I think the presumption that operates in opening government is that they assume that the inability for us to deal with terrorism can be tempered and can be stopped at the point at which we don't care about the lives of soldiers merely because they consented to it. The comparative in this debate is simple, and I don't understand why opening government refuses to engage. The information that you may lose at the point at which they capture a soldier and they get some information is something that we can respond to as a military and as a state on a collective. But every other effort to temper, stymie, and stop terrorism is contingent on our ability to cultivate public support, not only in the local areas of that of where the terrorism lies, but also back home by our citizens and their ability to consent to particular policies as well as funding for those efforts. And I think on a comparative, we think that trade-off is insufficient in this debate. I'm going to talk about two things. One, why do we think the Hannibal Directive is just as dangerous and inhumane as all the atrocities committed by terrorists, and why we think it hurts many war efforts? Secondly, I'm going to look at the cost on three different fronts and why I think government failed in this regard. Let's look at the first one. All my response will be integrated. The first thing we must know in this debate is that the standard of engagement that this policy allows for is a very low barrier of entry with very high costs. That means that often when it comes to soldiers that are captured, they are operating on the framework that information that the soldiers have will definitely lead to something like the 9/11 and will definitely hurt all other war efforts. And the cost that comes with that is that they're very willing to sacrifice not only soldiers but civilians as well. I think what Izzat told you is important in that when it comes to information, there's a spectrum of information, and often we can deploy responses to the information getting out rather than having to sacrifice individuals. I don't think they were able to make a comparative other than to say, well, you're a means to an end. It is less valuable because you agreed to be soldiers. I think that's just shameful to say that just because you agreed to be in the military, that your life is less important and less meaningful. What about the civilians who didn't consent to be part of that area? What about the civilians who didn't consent to be in the area where terrorism pervades, ladies and gentlemen? I think that's an issue. But what do we also do? We think and we agree that characterization illustrates that we often make an in-the-moment judgment. What does this indicate? Two things. One is that when it comes to foot soldiers having to shoot their friends, what it does is that it pushes the responsibility away from the government having to do something about rescuing their lives to the soldier in that moment having to make a calculated decision about whether or not I should shoot my bunkmate, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, in a scenario where the state chooses to engage, we engage in indiscriminate targeting, like the indiscriminate aerial strikes the Hannibal Directive utilized in Palestine in 2007. The rhetoric that you cultivate within these instances is that you are only a means to an end and your value is diluted just because you chose to serve the country. How does this hurt our efforts? 5 reasons. 1, I think what you do is you definitely hurt the soldiers' morale, especially those individuals who are serving abroad, ladies and gentlemen. And let us acknowledge the fight for terrorism as well as like war efforts is a long-drawn battle. And we often need these individuals who are far away from home, far away from their family, faced with risky decisions every single day to at least feel some degree of like realistic optimism in ensuring that my safety will be guaranteed to some extent. That the state will try as much as possible to ensure that I am not just a mere tool in the game of chess, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that DPM was like not cognizant of the fact that often it requires individuals wanting to consent, knowing that I may consent to dying, but I also must account for perhaps the state cares enough about me, knowing that I'm sacrificing lives for every other individual. Secondly, you heard support back home. No, thank you. I think when it comes to funding coming from other countries, war efforts and terrorism is per se initially beyond our reach. What people in the United States and Britain understand when it comes to war efforts is that we understand that it is our girls, our babies, our husband that is fighting overseas. And oftentimes we don't understand the calculated decisions that the state or Hannibal Directives have to make. So when the soldiers that were dragged naked through the jungles of Rwanda, the pictures came out, people were batshit angry because all they could see was their citizens and there was nothing that we did about it, and they pushed Congress to cut funding for these efforts. The same as when Israel citizens decided to push for the removal of this policy, and it was successful because the public outcry is nested as well as Israeli citizens when they saw that their people died and Palestinians as well. But thirdly, we also think you heard support in local areas. Let's be cognizant of the fact that when it comes to terrorism and war efforts, that not all individuals in that area is like complicit in the crimes of terrorism. In fact, sometimes they are victims of circumstances that would like to initiate and engage in a cooperation with you as a military as well. What you do is you tell people that your information as a local civilian may be important to us, but not to the extent that we're willing to do something about it. So we're okay with helping you sometimes, but not enough, even if it means that you are willing to engage in information trade with us as well. That means like local individuals who are willing to share information with you. That's like that's a lot more individualized to that area. Fourth, we think you heard recruitment efforts as well. I think there's already so much misgiving about joining the military to begin with because this whole calculation of life and race. But secondly, there's also like a large environment of war fatigue in status quo. I think it is important for us to be able to cultivate support for the military to show the individuals that you should want to support and you should want to engage in joining the military, that you shouldn't be misguided by the fact that your lives don't matter, that we do care about you. That's why even when soldiers come back, we give them pension. We care about veterans. That's why prisoners of war, we try as much as possible to fight for them because we acknowledge their lives as individuals, ladies and gentlemen. But fifth, I think when it comes to international support and the ability to coalesce resources between multiple countries, what we must also create is a perception to our allies that we are not inhumane bastards that not only not care about our people, but don't care about their people as well, like other soldiers in that area from other military, for example. I think it makes it far worse for us to be able to engage in international cooperation if we allow for this rhetoric to exist. Secondly, let's look at the cost, right? I think the first thing we must engage in this regard is terrorists and like negotiations. I think the thing that we have to acknowledge is that terrorism is a bad thing, but there's also a spectrum of motivation that we must understand in order for us to be able to temper like the creation of terrorism in specific areas, or in order for us to be able to understand like perhaps the cell of networks and how do we best target them. I think the attempts to moderate these communications or the attempts to bring them to the table becomes far worse if you just say we're never going to engage in any other methods other than bombing the shit out of you with the expectation that we're going to take your absolutely. I think you allow for fear to be cultivated. I think you allow for anxiety and a siege mentality to become compounded and exacerbated at the point at which you say we are always going to be like Hannibal and we're always going to kill people without ever really thinking about it. And this debate must be a comparative of that cost, and opening opposition is unwilling to bite that cost.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, to open up the voting houses and invite member of the
When you've been around enough people who have been brainwashed and might be in Syria tomorrow, you know you don't speak the same language. You think you know fear, but fear is when you are going to be decapacitated. Your video is in Al Jazeera and the whole world is watching you. Your fear is when your enemy doesn't even speak the same language of humanity as you do. You think you can be noble, but the only thing you do at the end of all of that is lose a war. But you think it's just losing war. What you do is the war drags on for years and years, and hundreds and thousands of lives are lost. You think you're saving one son, at the cost of that, you're destroying lives of millions others. And that's what this strategy is doing. Moving into the case. The first extension from our side will deal with what is justice for soldiers? What is the concept and how do we implement it? Given the exceptional circumstances, which only our team seems to be talking about, and this side doesn't tackle at all. Like, so I just told you the fact that terrorists don't speak the same language as we do in anywhere. That will be my third extension too. But what is it we already do for soldiers? We don't just send them out in the wild. Like, every soldier who joins the US Army is geared with $40,000 of weapons and ammunition. We prepared them. We send them to deserts. We send them everywhere. We give them all sorts of training that we can. We prepare them as best as we can. We give them air support. We give them nav control. We give them drones. Everything that we possibly can to mitigate that their lives are under risk. We already do that. What does all of that mean? It means we only put boots on the ground when it's exceptionally important. They know their life has to be sacrificed, but we don't use them as sacrificial lambs. I guess this analysis shows you this is the case, and therefore the narrative isn't skewed because we didn't agree for them to be, for their heads to be removed in Al Jazeera for the world to see. But maybe the second reason you can believe we're not abandoning our soldiers and this is justice for soldiers is because soldiers went there wanting to give up their life for the sake of humanity. The trade-off in this side is manifold. At the very least, you're going to give up things that will elongate war. That will only breed guilt in them. They would rather be martyrs than be the cause that elongated war. But the third thing is, I think as a soldier, when you know the treatment that you will have to go through, you know the degree of torture that no human being could ever imagine, not even Hitler for God's sake. That's what ISIS done. It strips off your humanity. And as a soldier, you would rather retain your humanity than face that possibility. And you know all of those things. And we think that's what a soldier would rather want. And that is the concept of justice for our soldiers. But the final thing is, as a soldier, when you know your trenchmate was the one who went in trying to save you, except died. That's what happens in these rescue missions. You would rather die yourself than have the life of all these other people in jeopardy, because you, in this case, are selfish, because your life was worth more than the life of others, because there were those Republican bastards in the Congress telling that your life is more valuable than anything, and there was all this loss that your country suffered and the civilians suffered, and you are accountable for all of that. So I think that is out of the debate. The second question in the debate, therefore, is what about the fact terrorists don't feel hurt? But the problem is, terrorists don't want to be hurt. That's the problem. The first thing they said is, we can compromise. What does compromise mean? Compromise means giving them money, giving them weapons, releasing their leaders. This is not misstep. You don't even talk about it. I mean, you have no direction in the debate. That's what a compromise means. That's what terrorists want. When you say yes to that compromise, essentially you have said yes to more fuel for violence. That's what you need to analyze, Jay. And what that means is, or you mitigate, right? What does mitigating mean? Like, say mitigating means moving camps. Mitigating means changing every plan. Mitigating means changing plans that depend on tenuous intelligence. And for God's sake, like, intelligence is like a super moon when it comes to these countries. Doesn't even happen once a year, for God's sake. All of those things happen. At the end of all of that, what happens is your allies look at you and they think you're just selfish. Your allies look at you and they see how unfocused you are. Your allies look at you and they see an image of vulnerability. And that is what detracts your allies, if that's what you're concerned, concerned about. So on your side, your allies are pissed, your allies are angry because Americans are just too selfish to look up to the cause because one guy is in danger. But the second thing that happens is even more vicious. It creates this atmosphere of negative charges. Now listen, if I'm a soldier and if my compatriot was taken away and tomorrow I'm going to have an incursion mission to save my compatriot, I don't care. I will go into the villages, kill civilians if necessary, torture them, use any illegal means to take any information that will make sure my rescue mission is a success. What that means is these soldiers who are on the ground and the civilians on the ground no longer have a relationship that is based on symbiosis, but a relationship that is based on confrontation. These soldiers want every bit of information that can be available to them. It means their relationship with these civilians is just suddenly completely negative because they're willing to do anything to save their partner, right? And that's what you have talked about, the fact that these guys care so much about each other. That's why you simply cannot allow a soldier to be in that place of emotional vulnerability, because when you're most vulnerable in terms of emotion, that's when you do the worst things in the world. As human beings, you probably know that. Yes.
Your ability to operationalize also requires those very same civilians not to be angry about the fact that you're also bombing civilians in that area, or you're also killing people in those villages as well.
Yeah, I mean, in war, that's a comparison of atrocities. Yes, there is a possibility. Say in 50% of the cases, a few civilians are going to die, or even a significant number of civilians are going to die. But they also see how to save your soldiers. Your soldiers are willing to torture civilians because they want to save your soldier. How to save your soldiers, your nation was willing to give up its long-term strategy. How to save your soldiers, it did not take care of intelligence and gave up immediate missions that were necessary to save civilians and reduce the degree of harm to the war. So the final point in the debate, therefore, is just in terms of talking about terrorists and what they are, you have to understand a few important things. These terrorists have a very different identity. They are not a state. They don't want recognition. The second thing, and this is ridiculous. Even East Germany wanted recognition. It was possible to talk to them. It's not with terrorists. The second thing is there is no accountability. You can't hold them accountable to any standards. You can't bring them in the Geneva Convention 20 years later or something. And that's why all the rules of conventional engagement of war doesn't apply in this debate. But the third thing is there are no boundaries when it comes to these people. But the fourth thing is, and this is the most important thing, the thing that shows what you are, what's most representative of your identity, is how you treat people you're fighting with. These terrorists have shown that in those terms, there are no limits. It's impossible to stem them. So when you give up to their demands, you only benefit their cause. You have to understand how terrorism works and their priorities to decide your rules of engagement. You cannot imagine you're dealing with civil beings when you're dealing with, I don't know, non-humans.
Thank you, member of government. Open up the case of closing opposition. I invite member of opposition. Yeah.
In closing opposition, we will focus on tangible military outcomes and why the Hannibal Directive will lead the West to lose the war on terror because it is unstrategic as an outcome. Before that, a couple of things. The first thing we need to ask is, what is the purpose of the war against terror? We don't just hate them because they're different from us. We don't just fight them because they have a different ideology. We fight them because they don't have respect for human dignity, they don't have respect for life, and they are probably going to kill us first. We think that the outcome of this Hannibal Directive is that we're going to do exactly to them or to people in that community what they were doing to the people in that community anyway, then we might as well lose the war, and losing the war is a possible option on our side, and that's fine. But let's be real. We think that at the end of the day, we do want to win the war, and we do want to ensure that we have some sort of outcome that is beneficial for us. In that regard, I'm going to do two substantives in this speech. One, on recruitment. Jay touched on it. We're going to explain who exactly gets recruited and why those people who are recruited are better off on our side. Secondly, we're going to talk about the kinds of military strategies that generals or leaders undertake when this is set as a norm or precedence on that side. Before that, two things. One, justice for soldiers. The argument Shitap makes is that PTSD is going to happen because the trenchmate died trying to save you. I'm sorry, post-traumatic stress disorder or any other form of fear that your trenchmate died for you is inevitable on both sides. Shitap spent the first minute telling us that we won't ditch soldiers, we will keep them because they are brotherhood, they are constantly going to be there to save them in all other situations outside of this one hostage situation. Then you're still going to lose your squad mates, you're still going to lose your brethren, and all that harm isn't getting any better on that side. Anyway, the second thing he tells us is you're going to lose allies because the government is going to be seen as selfish. I'm sorry, this assumes that a search and rescue mission equals a complete U-turn on all other strategies and plans for the war. The stance on this side is clear. Let's make this obvious. Will these soldiers die? Maybe, right? They might be tortured or killed by the terrorists. They might die during the search and rescue mission. There may be other options or other reasons why these soldiers who were captured died. That doesn't mean we ditch them completely and don't even try. We think that kind of rhetoric that you said towards these soldiers, that we're not even going to bother as soon as you're captured, is the problem. And that's where you lose allies because you're seen as inhumane, you're seen as someone who doesn't care for the very troops you put on the ground to solve the problems you thought were important as a state. You're more likely to lose allies on that side. Lastly, this concept of negotiation. Let's make this clear. No government is stupid. No government is going to go out and say, I will give you $10 million and like 100,000 troops and weapons in exchange for these two soldiers. That kind of negotiation is never, ever going to happen. We think in that paradigm, the way you solve it on our side isn't through negotiation of cash for soldiers or weapons for soldiers, but through proper search and rescue missions or any other form of ceasefire that can be made by the government with these authorities. That doesn't mean these terrorists gain any benefit from these processes. Let's go into substantive and look at recruitment before that closing.
So either you're going to do a search and rescue, in which case they're going to go down to these places and torture people for information, or even if you give them $50,000, that's like 5 AK-47, 50 people's blood in your hand.
Okay, one, no, we won't give them money or land that will result in that. But two, why does search and rescue mean torture? I'm not sure why that connection was made. Why is it that the only way to rescue a person is if I go and torture civilians? There's no real reason why that link is there. Let's look at recruitment. Jay tells you the rhetoric is sent is soldiers are sent for capture and aren't intended to come back, and that's a problem because these are people who we need to protect and that we need to recruit or send a good morale to communities. Deborah says, well, these people consent to the risk and therefore it's legitimate. But let's analyze this. Who are the people who join the army and who are the people who end up in Afghanistan or in Iraq as part of American troops? Shittab says these are people who are super patriotic and want to fight, and they are the people who will do anything for their country. Sure, that's one group of people who are there for the army. These are also your trigger-happy idiots who will end up causing a lot of harm because they want to do what's good for people and they want to end up doing what's best for society. The second group of people who end up in the army are your lower socio-economic community members who get convinced to join the army by your state-heavy recruitment propaganda because you tell these people, A, that there will be a loyal family unit and brotherhood to take care of you, B, there will be a stable career, and C, that it's your chance to do good. Therefore, it's not more humane to just kill them because you are the one who put them in that position and told them that their lives were valuable and that they were doing what's good for the country. What you do now instead is you tell them all of these things in propaganda, not so true, because the second you get captured, we're not even going to try, we're going to ditch you, and that's going to be a precedent that we set as a state that your life is only valuable insofar as you don't get caught in a very mission that we set up. Which brings us to the second thing that's important. What kind of military strategies will be undertaken when this is set as a norm or precedent? If you are a general or you are a military strategist and you are deciding on the kinds of missions and the kinds of programs or risks that the army or these troops should take, if you are told or you are aware that a proper directive is there where you can just kill a soldier if it comes down to it, or one of the soldiers can be sacrificed for a larger end goal, the likelihood is that you will plan riskier and more obviously dangerous missions because there's an easy way out of it if it fails. Because all you need to do is kill 1 or 2 soldiers, make sure they don't leak any information from it, and move on to the next mission. Easily replaceable men as a strategy for generals or strategy for military officers is bad because you put lives on the line and decide that more and more you can be more careless with the kinds of strategies you set up, which is even worse for the recruitment plans we told you in the first place. Because you set the rhetoric that we want to protect you, but you don't actually protect them in the long run because you send them for more and more risky missions, putting more and more of their lives on risk when you told them that they were there to be loyal and they were there to be a brotherhood and family unit and all those kinds of recruitment training that happens. The last thing that we need to talk about is this concept of how civilians play into this, right? Because there's a lot of discussion about civilians in the opening half, but it's not just about that. It's about the kind of intel and the kind of information that they're willing to provide you in your strategy. Because if these communities give you intel, they are doing it in the hope that you are there to protect them. What happens on our side, what happens on their side, is that they will no longer give you the intel simply because these civilians think that they are the sacrificial lambs or the sacrificial goats who will be there purely only to give you information, but not actually to deal with the kinds of harms that exist. What have we told you at the end of the day? We think that in closing opposition, if you want to win the war on terror, and if you actually want a chance at tangible military positive outcomes, you cannot have the Hannibal Directive.
Thank you, member of opposition. Now to the case from government, I invite Government here.
want to bring back the focus in this debate, because never did Site CG want to ever fully abandon the soldiers. Never did Site CG stand for always abandoning people at all times without calculation, without possible risks that necessarily they would make to prevent that from happening. This debate has to operate in exceptional cases. When it comes to lives that could come at the cost of one life, we think, unfortunately, that there is a degree of risk that you need to understand. That a pressure to save lives could come at the cost of ending that war. And it's not just about saving more groups of people for one life. It's also about not drawing out more soldiers for search and rescue missions, not drawing out more civilians into the possible crossfires, not drawing out the all-out war even further, when individuals who feel like they can scare you and they can make you bend to your knees, sit, necessarily feel like they are in power. I have three key questions that I want to posit. Number one, whose lives do we prioritize and where do we draw the line? Two, what exactly is the kind of justice that CG offers and whether or not this is better for people? Lastly, will this hurt recruitment? Because I want to tackle what OG also wanted to talk about. But first, that's all wanted to talk about. But first, right, whose lives do we prioritize? Understand that Site CG does not want to arbitrarily use them as tools. Vivian has said it herself, that governments are not stupid, right? That governments will make calculated risks and calculated decisions. That's why Shitab's first half of his speech was still relevant, because we told you, right, that we arm these soldiers with specific equipment and so on and so forth, also for their protection, also for them to want to prevent such a scenario from happening. But when it comes to the expense, or when it comes to a certain situation where they could necessarily be put in danger, we think there is a risk that you have to understand where their possible intel that they receive from all of those civilians, or their possible hierarchy or position and power could be used against the rest of the soldiers. But there has to be a degree of responsibility these soldiers will want to take up upon themselves. Because principally, if a lot of these individuals will want to die as martyrs, we would brand them as heroes. But it should not be any different if the government or the army or the generals in general would decide to actually enact this derivative. No, we will not allow for people not to try out anything, right? Obviously, we're not going to send these people for their death sentences, because Viha wanted to point out to you that, no, because we're not even going to save them, this means that soldiers are more likely to be risky in every single thing they do. That's ridiculous, because if that could ultimately result in you dying at the end of the day, then that means numbers in your in your battalion could necessarily lessen, and you would not want to take up that risk. So it is not true that soldiers would suddenly amp up and amp up the ante in terms of being completely risky, that they will want to risk their lives to the fullest without actually making calculated risks and calculated decisions. No, thank you. This first extension about justice told you that we need to understand a priority of what to save and what is at hand. The point at which you focus all of your resources into a search and rescue mission means that becomes the imminent priority. That becomes the immediate one, right? That means resources get prioritized. Soldiers who you had forced in different camps are now necessarily going to be part of the battalion that's going to max out in terms of searching and rescuing that lost soldier. No, thank you. But not only that, this side of the house did not engage with the part, but that is like Shita told you about the environment being negatively charged and emotionally charged. The nuance to this argument that we have is that when individuals now feel that they have to be ruthless in order to save their soldiers, means it could potentially be a slippery slope, especially when a lot of individuals feel that the end conclusion to this mission is for me to save my brother. And the end conclusion for me in this mission, no, is to prioritize my allegiance to my individuals within my battalion, without realizing that the people at home would still be robbed, would still be scared when they see those images of your soldiers, their husbands, their babies, their children being beheaded by militants and being beheaded by terrorists. That is a more abhorrent and disgusting image for an individual at home to have to face, rather than understanding that their death of their families came by the hands of individuals who were responsible, who were individuals who were humane and had some kind of code of conduct. Those terrorists did not. That's why when they killed off families, and they killed off journalists, and they killed off soldiers, they cared not for any part of justice for the families or the people back home. Second, what exactly is this kind of justice, and why do we think it's better, right? Because we think the point at which you put power, take power away from the hands of individuals who feel like they can bend you to their whim and put you on your knee, or put you to your knees, to realize that we are the ones who are in position to discuss. We are the ones who are in position to make sure you are in a position to continuously be scared. That's at which point people at home feel like there's never a possibility of this war having to getting ended in the near future, because all of the pressure is for you to save more lives, but it is very rarely for you to end wars in terms of it becoming what is going to prevent more prospective lives from being fatigued in wars or having more war fatigued individuals. No, thank you. But the messaging is also very important, right? Like I said, because it means that, like what Shitab said, because the messaging that you would send to these terrorists is that there is a weakness in your core. But this also transcends the enemies, right? This goes on to your possible allies. So if this war draws out and it's like individuals are war fatigued and your allies are war fatigued and they spot 1 ounce of vulnerability in your squad or in your core, that's at which point even your allies will wonder whether or not this war is still worth fighting for, whether or not this war will ever result in something other than just a ceasefire, other than just a possible solution where individuals stop or like we have some form of control, or we put some form of base, but people are still dying. But people are still being sent out to wars because there is still a continuous demand for war. Lastly, right, will this hurt recruitment? We don't necessarily think so, because it is true that while individuals feel like there might now be a bit of an additional level of like risk that they would have to take. Not just, oh, I might be killed in the field of battle, but I might get caught and that might result in the government not helping me. We think that is a legitimate trade-off, because when you're talking about legitimacy, the motivation to not want to pander to these terrorists has to be the ultimate goal. Or the trade-off is that you are able to defend a lot of individuals. Even if civilians unfortunately have to lose their lives, no one is going to be happy about it. But on a comparative, if you're talking about individuals in the future who could be prevented from the same fate, or incapacitating these terrorists in whatever way we can, we would gladly take that choice. Go inside CG.
I invite opposition here.
You may not intend to use my body as a tool, but when you put a gun in my hand, it might as well be. But when you also put a target on my body, I am a tool with no beneficial outcome. Really, my speech will deal with two particular issues, and I will engage very much with the crux of closing government's extension as well as the opening government's extension by amalgamating ours into the discussion. The two questions are, number one, who creates fear and vulnerability? Because those are the key issues that we heard from both Bani as well as Shitab. Secondly, what is the importance and what value do we really attach to the war, and whether or not national security is more likely in the case of the opening government, or do we undercut that with our extension? The first, who creates a sense of fear and vulnerability? Because Shitab was a little bit confusing. He started his speech by giving us a plethora of methods that we treasure our soldiers. He says a couple of things. He says we spend more than $40,000 US on a single soldier. We invest in air security, land support, ground control. All these things point to the fact that you have your back covered if shit hits the ceiling. But then he says, you know what? The sense that someone might shoot you, your own brother might shoot you, reduces that fear and vulnerability. We just don't get that connection. We don't think there is a logic there. If you are so invested in and you are so certain that love and affection and camaraderie is the principle that you're standing for, surely shooting the person that you would take care of most undercuts the very fear and vulnerability that you want to defend them from. Sit down. Because the question becomes, what creates a best form of trust and freedom from vulnerability? It's when your unit is most secure when things get toughest. But if you accept that when things get toughest, you're cannon fodder, we think you lose and you make fear a lot worse. The very people you fear are your own military generals, are your own soldiers, are your own teammates. We think fear and vulnerability is something you do not win. But he adds to this. He says, when the soldier knows your friend has died for you, that's when they feel really horrible. We think we posit the converse. We think when you know that your friend and your teammates are more likely to die to rescue you, that's when you would fight the most in order to ensure that your mission is most successful. Why would I feel guilty about people dying to rescue me if I never considered that the person would have to shoot me in the first place? If I ensure that a vast amount of my unit is successful, then that wouldn't be part of my consideration. We have it more likely on our side. Have a seat. The third thing he says is people go batshit. The accusation is that, because of this model, we would have more batshit crazy missions, according to Pani. So again, my opening line is really crucial here. You may not intend to go batshit crazy, but the calculation is, if you're a military general and you know there are members of your unit that are weaker or will be less missed or people won't care so much about, that's when mission strategies would amplify the fact that these people are disposable. They'll be more risky. No one would care for them. That's the analysis that you missed out on the closing government. I'm moving on to the opening government. I'll take a point. Yeah, sure.
So it's okay to sacrifice many soldiers' lives to save one, but it's not okay to sacrifice one soldier to prevent the many from risking their lives.
You see the distinction here is the intention in which you try, the sacrifice happens. So it's a huge difference between all of us here deciding there are some that should die versus an alternate room in this tournament that just opposes us and wants to come to fight us. It's completely different. Can you imagine, Viha and I would have to choose how best to kill our opening opposition, which we love, or how best to kill our friends in the closing government, which we also love. The level of animosity, the fear, the vulnerability heightens. You cannot say on one side there is no difference and then say on the other there is a complete difference. We think that's contradictory. Let's move on to the opening government. What is the importance and the value of war? If you listen to the language of the opening government, I found this really interesting. Let me replay it for you. The people that we should be afraid of are people that kill many civilians, that have killed many soldiers. Debo says they destroy cities. I found myself asking, who are they talking about? Are they talking about the Taliban? Are they talking about Al-Qaeda? Or are they talking about the US government? Because to be very honest, according to their own principle, it's interchangeable, isn't it? If you are willing to shoot the members of your own families and of your own unit, then surely there is very little distinction in the differences of the two. So if you listen to the principle of the opening government, surely you should fear yourselves, because in real time, about 2,000, 3,000 people died in the World Trade Center 9/11 attacks. 126,000 innocent lives have died in Iraq, according to the Iraqi body count, in retaliation to that. So if anything, ladies and gentlemen, the moment we decide that the ends justify the means is when we've lost it. That's why Viha started very strongly to tell you maybe some wars should be lost. Have a seat. But even if you wanted to win the wars and they hung their hats on national security, let me tell you why you've lost that as well. Firstly, we told you recruitment is problematic. Not just that recruitment will lessen, but it's also about the kinds of recruits you will get. Because if you listen to Bunny's rebuttal to Viha, she just says, recruitment reduction, no problem. We say, no, it's the kinds of recruits you'll get. The first thing she told you is that maybe you have your supranational, crazy, white, nationalistic soldiers coming in. Those are also the same people that will be trigger happy and shoot anyone they feel in their unit when shit gets harder, and they'll be more trigger happy, and that will heighten animosity and fear. That's a lot worse on your side. But secondly, it's also about the groups of people that come from lower economic backgrounds. They have no option but to opt into the military. Don't tell us about humanity when you put them in that situation and decide they are cannon fodder. The second thing we told you is about military strategies. The assumption cannot be that taking more reckless, more risky missions equals more success. That's not it, right? So more reckless, more risky missions equals easier tactics, easier options for military strategies, not necessarily more successful ones. So the key here is, if you hung your hats on national security, we undercut that by telling you why national security is less possible. Ladies and gentlemen, if the situation now is negatively charged, I think you would have it a lot more hellish when you tell them that they have a target on their back. So don't buy, like, we make it work, they make it work. Thank you.
Thank all teams for this debate. Bye.
Can we not?
So many people.
Can we meet somewhere in 5? Where do you want to meet? Oh, sorry, you want more time. Okay.
Let's just go outside.
Yeah, where are you going?